By late 1941, the Wehrmacht's advance into the Soviet Union had outrun its logistical capacity. The vast distances, collapsing infrastructure, and early frost crippled the army's ability to feed itself. Supply lines extending hundreds of kilometers over dirt roads became impassable. Motor transport failed, horses froze, and requisitioned grain spoiled in unheated depots. German soldiers at the front subsisted on half rations, while field kitchens struggled to keep meat from decaying before reaching the lines. In several sectors, particularly around Smolensk and Vyazma, improvised local procurement became essential. German foraging units turned to villages for livestock and poultry, often finding little more than a few surviving chickens. Official orders discouraged dependence on such unreliable sources, but necessity overruled policy. The paradox was that poultry, fragile and small, proved the only livestock easily transported alive through sub-zero conditions. Chickens survived where cattle and pigs could not. It was during this crisis that a simple observation made by a Belarusian farmer spread through German units. An apparently foolish trick that solved a practical problem. The farmer, whose property had been commandeered as a field kitchen, showed that freshly laid eggs buried in straw inside a barrel and surrounded by live hens would remain edible for weeks, even in freezing weather. The birds' collective body heat, trapped by the insulating hay, maintained a microclimate just above freezing. A skeptical quartermaster tried the method, expecting rot. Instead, the eggs remained intact, their internal moisture preserved, and even the hens survived the transport. Within days, word spread among logistic detachments. The chicken barrel trick, as soldiers called it, began appearing in field reports and later in official guidelines for improvised cold storage. It seemed absurd, relying on barnyard warmth to sustain an army. But in the winter of 1941, absurdity became adaptation. What began as a peasant survival habit would quietly sustain divisions across the Eastern Front. When the first snow closed the roads in November 1941, the supply services of Army Group Center faced the near collapse of their perishable food system. Frozen meat shattered when cut, vegetables became unmanageable blocks, and even butter rations split from crystallization. The Army's official solution, salt preservation and tinned products, could not meet demand. Transport bottlenecks delayed canned goods for weeks. It was then that the field kitchens began adopting the chicken barrel. Improvisation on a wide scale. In rear areas, requisitioned farms were ordered to provide hens rather than slaughtered poultry. Chickens, small and durable, required minimal feed and reproduced quickly. Packed in straw-lined crates, they could be transported by horse or truck without special insulation. Each crate doubled as a mobile incubator. The birds' heat preserved both themselves and the eggs, maintaining an internal temperature between 5 degrees Celsius and 8 degrees Celsius. The threshold preventing both freezing and spoilage field kitchens began pairing each mobile oven with 2 or 3 such crates. Soldiers noted that, unlike salted meat, eggs retained full nutritional value and required no boiling water, which was often unavailable. An egg could be consumed raw or cooked on a mess tin. Reports recorded that 2 eggs per day supplemented a soldier's protein intake, sufficiently to delay malnutrition and frostbite susceptibility. The system spread not through command orders, but through imitation. Workshop units built standardized chicken barrels from fuel drums, adding vent holes and straw insulation. Each could house 10 hens and preserve up to 120 eggs in rotation. Within a month, thousands of barrels moved along divisional supply lines, some mounted directly on sledges for frontline resupply. The logistical benefit was quantifiable. Egg-based rations reduced caloric deficits in frontline divisions by up to 15% during December and January. Mortality from hunger-related illness fell correspondingly. What the High Command saw as an anecdotal trick became, by the numbers, a functioning cold chain, a self-heating food transport network powered by the smallest domestic animal in Europe. By January 1942, reports from multiple corps-level logistics officers confirmed the consistent success of the chicken barrel method. Initially dismissed as field improvisation, it began receiving attention from the Army's Quartermaster General Office, Heeresverwaltungsamt. A circular issued on the 17th of January formally described self-warming poultry transport units as an acceptable supplement to standard supply vehicles in frozen zones. What had begun as rumor was now codified procedure. Field workshops across Army Group Center were instructed to convert spare fuel drums, ammunition cases, and damaged water tanks into Tierbehälter Type H livestock containers. The specifications were pragmatic. Straw bedding 15 centimeters thick on all sides, perforated lids for air exchange, and an inner wooden frame preventing direct metal contact. Each container carried 10 hens and roughly 100 eggs, rotated every 3 days. The statistical impact was measurable. Between January and March 1942, the total protein output from poultry on the Eastern Front increased by over 20%, despite catastrophic rail shortages. Divisions with functioning poultry chains reported improved health markers, lower rates of scurvy, fewer cases of trench fever, and steadier combat endurance. The Wehrmacht's medical service correlated these outcomes with stabilized caloric intake, confirming what field cooks already knew. The chickens were feeding the army more effectively than most supply convoys. Farmers within occupied territories were conscripted as advisors. Rural expertise replaced formal logistics training. Civilians taught German units how to maintain hens in sub-zero barns, manage molting periods, and preserve straw dryness, skills alien to mechanized armies. In return, troops supplied salt, kerosene, and protection, transforming villages into miniature agricultural nodes integrated with military distribution networks. By spring thaw, the absurd experiment had become infrastructure. The chicken network, spanning from Smolensk to Kharkov, functioned as a low-technology supply web independent of trucks or rail. Historians later identified it as one of the first examples of a distributed biological logistics system, an adaptation where life itself became storage, warmth, and sustenance. Through the spring of 1942, the poultry network evolved into a coherent logistical organism. Engineers calculated that one hen, consuming 120 grams of grain per day, could produce enough heat to preserve a cluster of 15 to 20 eggs and yield 1 egg daily. In aggregate, a transport wagon with 40 hens sustained itself biologically. The birds produced their own warmth, multiplied food mass through eggs, and reduced waste because no ice or insulation was required. The Feldverpflegung, Field Supply Service, began compiling data on the system. Reports from Army Group South documented a 30% improvement in food survivability along the Dnieper corridor. Hence, survival rates exceeded those of horses in identical weather conditions, a statistic that redefined priorities for animal transport. Poultry proved immune to the hoof rot, exhaustion, and cold shock that decimated draft animals. As the front stabilized in mid-1942, chicken depots appeared behind divisional zones. Barracks, storage barns, and even wrecked churches were converted into hatcheries, operated jointly by requisitioned civilians and German quartermasters. The system self-replicated. Each depot bred replacements for lost birds and distributed eggs along marked routes known colloquially as Eierlinien, egg lines. German ordnance departments analyzed the energy balance. 1 kilogram of grain fed to hens produced 0.25 kilograms of edible protein in eggs, low efficiency compared to cattle, yet unmatched in portability. Each egg contained compact nutrition that required no cooking water, no packaging, and negligible fuel for transport. This logistical calculus made chickens not an accessory, but a unit of energy transfer, effectively a renewable ration source. By late summer, over 500,000 hens were recorded within Wehrmacht agricultural inventory east of Minsk. Their combined output reached 10 to 12 million eggs per week. Soldiers joked that, "Our breakfast lays itself." Yet behind the humor lay measurable strategic consequence. Entire divisions could sustain partial self-sufficiency even when rail convoys failed. What began as a farmer's stupid trick had become an operational model, a fusion of agrarian physics and military necessity, demonstrating that in a theater ruled by winter and distance, survival could hinge on the metabolic heat of ordinary birds. By autumn 1942, the poultry logistics network had expanded beyond improvised field supply. The Wirtschaftsstab Ost, the economic staff East, recognized its efficiency and absorbed it into broader occupation policy. Directives ordered every rear area administration to maintain biological reserve assets, prioritizing poultry as a renewable protein source. The aim was to supplement the strained rail-based ration chain with living transport that multiplied itself en route. Agricultural officers requisitioned local farms but retained their original caretakers under supervision, formalizing a hybrid military-civilian production system. Each controlled village maintained quotas, feed allocation, egg output, and chick replacement cycles. German veterinarians issued standardized vaccination and breeding schedules. The process had become industrial without machinery, organized vitality converted into arithmetic. On the front, divisional quartermasters implemented rolling farms. Trucks, wagons, and even captured Soviet sledges carried small flocks that moved with the troops. Each company kitchen managed its own flock registry. Losses from predators or cold were minimal compared to traditional livestock. The hens' feed consisted of grain sweepings and leftovers from horse rations, resources previously wasted. Every layer of the system fed another, transforming logistical inefficiency into closed metabolic loops. Quantitatively, the results were remarkable. Between September 1942 and February 1943, over 40% of all fresh protein rations consumed by combat troops on the Eastern Front derived from eggs or poultry meat. The nutritional impact translated directly into endurance. The incidence of cold-related illness dropped sharply in units maintaining active chicken supplies. Army medical bulletins acknowledged noticeably improved physical resistance among continuously provisioned formations. The High Command took notice. Reports from the General Quartiermeister's office listed the chicken network as a contributing factor to maintaining effective combat strength during the winter of 1942-43. An endurance the Red Army had not expected. After the first campaign, millions of soldiers were surviving, not because of armored breakthroughs or supply miracles, but because a peasant's practical sense had evolved into systemic nutrition engineering. By early 1943, the chicken network had ceased to be an improvisation. It entered the bureaucracy of the German supply apparatus as a quantifiable system. Agricultural scientists attached to the Heeresnahrungsamt, Army Food Office, conducted controlled studies comparing conventional rations with the egg-based supplement chain. The results confirmed what soldiers already observed in the field: stable caloric intake, higher protein retention, and reduced fatigue. Reports codified parameters. Optimal population density was defined as 10 hens per square meter of insulated crate, straw bedding thickness at 12 centimeters for thermal balance, ventilation rate 1 liter of air per bird per minute. Even feed conversion ratios were standardized: 3.5 kilograms of grain per dozen eggs produced. Engineers calculated that 1 wagon of live hens provided nutritional equivalents to 6 tons of canned meat, but at 1/3 of the transport weight and with self-sustaining reproduction. To integrate management, the Quartermaster General's office introduced the Frontversorgungshühnerkarte, a poultry accounting card recording egg yields, feed consumption, and mortality. Logistics officers joked that hens now had paperwork equal to that of soldiers. Yet the documentation served a serious purpose. It allowed mathematical modeling of biological productivity, turning farm management into a supply science. By mid-1943, veterinary detachments functioned as mobile agricultural units. They monitored disease, vaccinated against Newcastle virus, and controlled crossbreeding to maintain hardy lines suited for cold climates. Reports noted that certain hybrid breeds from Ukrainian stock survived temperatures below -20 degrees Celsius while maintaining 70% egg yield, an evolutionary adaptation directly benefiting the army. In parallel, the civilian economy of occupied territories became entwined with the military system. Farmers received small payments in salt or machine parts in exchange for maintaining hens for Wehrmacht collection routes. Rural life and war economy fused. Biology filled the gaps where railroads, refineries, and factories had failed. By the autumn of 1943, the chicken system represented not rural eccentricity, but organized adaptation. Proof that industrial warfare could survive only by integrating pre-industrial resilience. The farmer's stupid idea had matured into a rational, standardized mechanism feeding millions. By winter 1943-44, the Wehrmacht's poultry logistics had become an invisible foundation of its endurance in the East. Divisions still suffered from ammunition shortages and fuel crises, yet malnutrition, once a pervasive drain on combat strength, had largely stabilized. Internal army reports credited the continuous protein source from eggs and poultry for maintaining fighting capability, despite the strategic decline of the German position. The chicken lines had effectively insulated the frontline ration chain from the collapse of the rail network. This biological redundancy altered operational tempo. Units could remain in forward positions for longer without resupply, enabling sustained defense during Soviet offensives. It also eased the burden on the overstrained Ostbahn rail corridors, freeing train capacity for munitions and fuel. Analysts calculated that substituting one wagon of eggs and poultry for canned goods saved roughly 2 tons of shipping weight per 1,000 men. At scale, the resource savings equaled thousands of tons of freight each month, invisible efficiency derived from straw and feathers. The policy spread westwards. When Allied bombing disrupted supply centers in France and the Low Countries, rear depots replicated the Eastern poultry models. German administrators introduced small-scale urban egg stations, encouraging civilians to breed hens under standardized Wehrmacht feed quotas. Even Luftwaffe air bases adopted mobile coops for ground personnel rations, reducing reliance on convoys vulnerable to air raids. Strategically, the significance was not nutritional alone, but systemic. The German military economy, strangled by attrition, had discovered in the farmer's logic a scalable resilience, a logistics loop independent of industry. Each crate of hens represented portable calories, heat, and biological renewal, functions impossible to replicate mechanically under wartime scarcity. To Allied intelligence, the persistence of German resistance through 1943 to 1944 seemed disproportionate to its collapsing infrastructure. Few realized that a part of that endurance came from an agricultural improvisation that turned livestock into living warehouses. The trick that began in a frozen Belarusian barn had matured into an empire-wide support web, proof that adaptation, not abundance, could sustain millions of soldiers far longer than theory allowed. By mid-1944, the chicken network had reached its logistical peak and its structural limits. The Wehrmacht's retreat across Ukraine and Belarus destroyed many of the static depots and breeding centers that had made the system self-sustaining. Mobile egg wagons still functioned at divisional level, but with every kilometer of withdrawal, the resource base shrank. Hens required grain, straw, and protection from artillery shock. As front lines collapsed, these simple needs became unattainable. Army Group Centers' evacuation orders included explicit instructions to preserve poultry stock, yet chaos made compliance impossible. Thousands of crates were abandoned or looted by civilians. The remaining flocks suffered stress from constant movement, halving their output within weeks. Reports in September 1944 noted nutritional interruption due to biological exhaustion. The same living chain that had once symbolized resilience now exposed the limits of an army forced into perpetual motion. The Germans attempted adaptation again. Veterinary officers proposed consolidating remaining flocks near rail junctions in Poland, using them as stationary protein reservoirs, but bombing and fuel shortages isolated those centers before they could distribute supplies. Simultaneously, Soviet reoccupation of farmland cut off access to the very villages that had provided breeding stock. The biological network, once autonomous, now mirrored the military retreat, disintegrating in stages as the infrastructure feeding it disappeared. Despite its collapse, the system's legacy remained visible in statistics. Even in the chaotic final winter of 1944-45, soldiers on the Vistula front consumed more fresh protein than during the first winter in Russia, a residual effect of the hen lines still functioning in the West. The method's efficiency had created momentum that outlasted organization itself. German logistics officers later acknowledged that without the chicken supply system, attrition from hunger and exposure would have reached catastrophic proportions by 1943. Its decline did not negate its achievement. A farmer's accidental thermal trick had postponed starvation on an industrial scale. It proved that the simplest biological process, warmth, reproduction, continuity, could extend the lifespan of an army fighting beyond its logistical horizon. By early 1945, the poultry-based supply chain no longer functioned as an organized system. What remained were fragments, individual units carrying a few hens in wagons, local farmers still exchanging eggs for protection, scattered depots near Austria and Bohemia, maintaining token production. Yet the principle it had embodied, self-sustaining, biologically powered logistics, had already reshaped the German approach to survival in collapse. Frontline soldiers referred to the last surviving flocks as Kriegsfedern, war feathers, symbols of endurance amid decay. In desperate conditions, eggs remained the only renewable food source that could appear without industrial input. Even after supply breakdown, soldiers in retreat scavenged hens as strategic assets, trading them between units. Like Currency Command reports show mentions of mobile poultry detachments still operational as late as March 1945, even while fuel, ammunition, and vehicles were exhausted. The system's conceptual afterlife continued in planning documents recovered after the war. Late-war German agricultural memoranda analyzed the chicken network as a case study in adaptive logistics, emphasizing distributed production, local feed loops, and minimal mechanical dependence. These documents, stripped of ideology, later influenced early Cold War research into autonomous field provisioning for both military and disaster relief purposes. In civilian terms, the legacy was visible across occupied Europe. Farmers who had been integrated into Wehrmacht supply retained improved breeds and techniques. After 1945, egg production in Belarus, Ukraine, and Poland spiked above pre-war levels due to these surviving lines. An improvisation born of hunger became a component of post-war agricultural recovery. The paradox was complete. A device meant to sustain invasion had inadvertently strengthened local farming after defeat. The peasants' stupid trick outlived the army that had adopted it. What had started as a practical improvisation to stop eggs from freezing evolved into a model of distributed resilience, the most successful logistical system ever born from desperation rather than design. When the war ended in May 1945, the paperwork of the poultry logistics vanished into archives labeled as agricultural requisition files. Yet its consequences endured long beyond the fall of the Reich. Allied analysts reviewing captured documents found detailed tables of egg yields, feed ratios, and temperature curves, evidence that one of the world's largest armies had survived 2 winters not through engineering marvels, but through biological heat management devised by a village farmer. Post-war evaluations by agricultural ministries in Britain and the Soviet Union quietly borrowed from the German data. They confirmed that the microclimate of live poultry in straw maintained a stable internal temperature between 6 degrees Celsius and 9 degrees Celsius, regardless of external frost, a principle later used for livestock transport and humanitarian cold chain design. The physics of the chicken barrel thus outlived its military origin, evolving into civil logistics science. For the soldiers it had fed, the system became a quiet legend. Veterans spoke of egg convoys that had followed them across the steppe, of nights warmed by the clucking of hens under tarps, of improbable survival when canned food froze solid. No medals or citations were ever issued for it. Yet, in the statistical accounting of war, millions of men had endured because of it. The logic behind the method revealed a broader truth about total war, that endurance depends not only on machinery or ideology, but on the capacity to adapt the smallest forms of life to sustain the largest. The farmer's trick demonstrated that in the failure of industrial order, resilience reverted to biology, warmth, reproduction, continuity, the most ancient logistics of all. By 1946, the data was reclassified under field sustenance research, disconnected from its wartime context. Its origin was forgotten, its inventor unnamed. Yet every modern insulated transport crate for perishables, every mobile food incubator, carries a trace of that forgotten equation. Straw, heat, and hence preserving sustenance under impossible conditions. The stupid trick with chickens had, without intention or ideology, proven that life itself could be engineered into strategy, and that sometimes the most profound victories come from the simplest warmth. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more World War II stories.